Well, I called this video Croppity Crop 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 because there is so much to cover and I could go on for a long time. But without further ado, I'm going to get into some massive changes on the crop tool. If you hit the letter C on your keyboard, you'll jump to the crop tool and you'll notice instantly it automatically sets the crop bounds to the edge. In fact, just pressing Return or Enter will show you the guide of rule of thirds that was added in PhotoshopCS6. Now, the rule of thirds creates the illusion of space or depth. It's a visual effect. And it divides the image into 9 equal parts, avoiding centering of the image. This shot is a perfect example. The little boy being thrown in the air. And if I want to get the most interesting piece of this at a good spot, I want to have the intersection of 2 of these guides be where the subject exists, calling the viewer's eye to that spot. And I could decide that I just love the blue visual effect of that sky, so I can leave it. But I want to show you a few more differences on the crop tool. You'll notice as I pull in, the image is always being auto-centered. And there is now a checkbox up here to delete crop pixels or not. You'll notice even I have a layer called Crop Preview automatically. If I do decide to pull this in a bit, and I do uncheck Delete Cropped Pixels, when you double-click anywhere on the inside or press Return or Enter, it actually ends up naming your background layer. And that means you could now apply transparency to make it partially see-through, but this would have to be saved in a layered format, like a Photoshop file or a TIFF file with layers. Otherwise, you would need to flatten the image, meaning you're back to your background layer. Let's look at a few other changes. If I go to this headshot, I'm still on the rule of thirds, and this is what brings up the long conversation I want to have with everyone. The golden ratio or golden spiral. Now, when I first learned the golden ratio, I learned it as the golden mean. And actually, there's applications to psychology. Aristotle said the golden mean is the desirable middle between 2 extremes, one of excess and the other of deficiency. Well, in the real world, the golden ratio can be used to identify a beautiful face. If I choose golden ratio and just move the corners a bit, you'll see the formula. And the formula is basically a scale, a ratio. 1.618, roughly, there's more numbers to the end of that, to 1. As I pull the crop guides in close to her face, you'll notice it's always centering the image in the crop area. This felt a little awkward to me at first, but now I love that I can keep the image portion in the middle of my screen so I can see what I'm doing. I'm going to hit Command plus or Control plus to zoom in, and I'll attempt to make this a little bit more aligned to the edge of her face. And it is said that a beautiful face has that golden ratio, that proportion of 1.618 to 1 to 1.618. And she proves the theory, a very beautiful model, and her face fits in those proportions. In fact, many of you have probably come across this or heard the rumors that the Mona Lisa and the works of Leonardo da Vinci are divided up into the golden mean or the golden ratio. It may also be called the divine proportion, the golden section, and there's even references to sacred geometry. But without getting too deep on you, some other places that you may see this ratio are in the pyramids of Giza, the Parthenon at Athens, and harmonic notes in music. In fact, for years I've been obsessed with the Fibonacci sequence or the Fibonacci series of numbers. I'm going to press Escape. Escape is a great trick to cancel. I just wanted to show you the new guides of the golden ratio. They do also have a triangle, and if I press Return or Enter, you could see those light up, and diagonal guides, just for visual effect, to create interest in the image, tension, energy. I'm going to flip over to this diagram that I created, and I will warn you all, it's probably not 100% mathematically accurate. I did use vector tools to explain or illustrate how the Fibonacci spiral works. Fibonacci was a mathematician from Italy, actually from Pisa, who lived in the 1100s and 1200s, and he came up with a series of numbers that starts with 0 and 1, and then if you add 0 and 1, you get 1, and then if you add 1 and 1, you get 2, and if you add 1 and 2, you get 3, and so on. 3 and 5, you get 8, so each 2 of the before add up to the next number in the series. Now, the golden ratio is similar. The Fibonacci sequence is really just a takeoff on the golden ratio. It's similar in concept, and what is important to see is this spiral. If you draw a diagram of the Fibonacci sequence or the Fibonacci series, you'll see starting with quarter circle arcs going from the first square all the way out to the rest of the numbers, it actually creates a pattern that's seen in nature. It's seen in many plants and flowers. For example, the series repeats over and over again in flowers. The lily has 3 petals, the buttercup has 5, delphiniums have 8, some daisies have 13, the black-eyed Susan has 21. So there's the series or the sequence, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, and on from there. And this could map out to infinity. In fact, Fibonacci calculated with a series of tests on rabbits the population sequence, predicting how many you'd have if you start with 2 rabbits. It also controls the branching rate of many plants, so the plants will petal out, leaving room for others underneath. A really interesting one is the passion flower. The passion flower actually has, on the back of it, 3 sepals, 5 petals, and 5 petals. On the front, 5 petals, 5 stamens, and 3 carpels. So that 5-3-3 or 3-5-5 repeats over and over again. So just a little stuff you probably never thought you'd learn when discussing the crop tool in Photoshop. The reason I mention all of that here is they do have a golden spiral option. So as I start to pull in over your own images, you can look for that infinite sequence that really, according to some movies, is the meaning of life. Well, I think we all know it's 42, according to Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And here is an inverse image of the Fibonacci spiral. You can see my hand drawing here, and then the golden spiral. New guide on the new crop tool in PhotoshopCS6. I'm going to finish it up by going to an image I want to crop. And I will go to the rule of thirds. Now I could choose just a flat grid if I don't want something interesting centered at a PowerPoint to create interest, but I like to always leave on the rule of thirds. In fact, I turn this guide on my digital camera to remind me, don't perfectly center everyone in the shot. It doesn't create interest. It makes actually for flat or static photos. But as I've chosen the rule of thirds, I can just pull the corners in. And sometimes I like to go in and change the settings. One of my favorites to change is making the opacity of the crop guide 100%. That way, I don't see a dimmed image in the background of the transparency. If I set it to 100, I can pull up from the bottom and really see my post-cropping result. And I'll just crop all of this away, but my goal would be to place the bridge at an interesting spot. And I really want to get the American flag in there on the left as well. Now, one side note, sometimes the crop tool fights you. If you find it's jumping a whole pixel row or grids, on both platforms, Mac and Windows, you can hold down Control. For the Mac users, this is not your command key. We usually only use Control to right-click if we're on a trackpad on a laptop. But the Control key temporarily disables the snap, so it's not trying to fix it to a certain spot. So if you're trying to make small moves and you see a little transparency and you want to move up subtly, hold down Control on both Mac and Windows while you drag. And there I see I do have a little extra room on that flag. And I might decide to leave a little bit extra and use my content-aware fill to fill in that sky or make up new sky. Now, a couple other settings that you have here. You can turn off the Auto Center Preview if you find it distracting. There's even a Use Classic mode to make it behave like the crop tool in earlier versions, so you don't have to uncheck these 2 boxes. If I turn it off, I could choose whether I show the cropped area or I auto-center the preview. And I will press Return or Enter, or you can click here to reset or cancel, or the check mark would be the same as hitting the Return or Enter key. Now notice the file size, 22.2 megabytes. When I press Return or Enter, it should update because even white space in an image takes up file size. With just cutting that little bit away, if I do a Command Z or Control Z, there's 22.2. Redo, Command Shift Z or Control Shift Z, or Edit Redo, I've cropped it down to 17 megs. So it is important to get tight crops on images so you aren't creating unnecessarily large files. But since Delete Cropped Pixels was off, if I zoom out and pull my crop area back outside, I still have all this territory that physically exists in the image because it technically made a layered file. So that's what Delete Cropped Pixels does. It never permanently removes the data if this is off. The old-fashioned way, or the previous way this worked, was always to have it delete cropped pixels, and I believe that's the default for PhotoshopCS6, so you won't accidentally be creating layered files when you're only working with a flat image or something that just has a background layer. That is your tour of the amazing new settings on PhotoshopCS6's crop tool. And a little sacred geometry and math and useless trivia to boot. So experiment with the settings of the crop tool in Photoshop CS6. Once you apply these guides to your images, it'll open up a whole new world of creating visual interest and tension and energy in your photographs.